Imposing monuments, designed to withstand the bloodiest sieges and the territorial wars and battles of the Middle Ages. A castle is the last bastion to protect a lord and his family. To take it, you have to overcome many hidden traps, like barbicans.
It means trap in Arabic. They were designed to trap their enemies.
Taking a castle by storm is a perilous business, but a revolution in weaponry means the risks are limited.
So the idea was to be far away, to bombard the castle, break through the walls and get inside the fortifications more easily.
The new weapons were incredibly effective, but you still had to know how to use them. Their complexity meant the emergence of new experts.
Today we would call them engineers.
And three chateaux represent the genius of ancient castle builders. There's the castle of Beynac in the Dordogne. Built into the side of a cliff, it is invulnerable.
It's the archetypal castle. It dominates the landscape. It overwhelms everything.
The Château d'If near Marseille was the last fortified castle to be built, just after the Middle Ages, with cannons designed to sink ships. Anyone who gets past the Château d'If can get their hands on one of the richest ports in the Mediterranean. The third fortress is especially mysterious. The Château de Fougères in Brittany has been keeping secrets for almost 1,000 years. Like these towers, why do they have such thick walls? An incredible 7 meters.
The epitome of the medieval tower.
Why did they need to be so imposing? And what is the purpose of the earthworks piled up behind the walls? And the strange door that opens onto a 10-meter void? Fougères, Beynac, If. Dive into the history of France and its ancient megastructures. The Middle Ages saw the emergence of strongholds in the 9th century. And as they moved from wooden to stone construction, they became known as fortified castles.
The fortified castle is an invention of the Middle Ages. That's where its origin lies. There were never any before nor after. From the 11th century onwards, France was covered in fortified castles, marking the beginning of a golden age as they were continually perfected.
It's almost impossible to count the number of these new castles. There are thousands of them, because in the Middle Ages, wars over territory exploded and rich lords had to protect themselves.
The castle is the domestic environment of a group of people who dominate society. This is expressed in the height of the walls and also in the altitude of the chosen site.
One family made dominance via the height of its towers its priority, the Barons of Beynac. In the heart of the Dordogne, one of the most impressive castles of its time. Atop a tall cliff stands a colossus of stone, Beynac Castle, a titan of the Middle Ages.
It's visible from a long way off, so you arrive and you're impressed by this massive structure, the fortress, the very high walls perched on the rock.
This is a strategic point. We're 150 meters above the river up here on the roof of the castle, and we can observe the valley behind us and look down on the whole plateau.
But to build such an edifice, you need to be one of the most powerful families in the region. In the 12th century, the Beynac family were key players in the Périgord. they came from an illustrious house that had existed for many generations. The Baron de Beynac shared feudal power with 3 other families in the region. And the rivalry was intense.
They all wanted to be more powerful and stronger than the others, and they wanted to demonstrate their power by constructing buildings that were stronger and stronger, bigger and bigger.
And if you're looking for altitude, the site is exceptional. A rock 90 meters high, an impressive cliff with a building on its summit. The castle promises to be quite imposing. Perfect natural protection. So this is where the castle will be built, with its tallest tower 60 meters high. To build it, they used stone from the region, a superb gold-colored limestone. The other secret of these perfect walls and towers, how the superbly cut stones were laid. And to lift them without damaging them, there's the Lewis, a special lifting device. The first step is to make a hole in the center of the block. A hollow that is cut into a triangular shape. The first piece is inserted on one side, then the second on the opposite side. Finally, the third element is put into the center. A shackle is placed over the 3 parts to allow them to be hooked together. Then a pin is slid in to fully lock the 4 parts. Now the block with its attachment system is ready to be lifted. This is how Château de Beynac was built. Creating beautiful walls, but not all of the same thickness, like those above the cliff, which are much thinner than elsewhere.
As this is a place where there's no risk of attack, it's above the cliff, they made the walls a bit thinner, going from 2.5 meters here to 1.5 meters.
Saving stone, as is possible above the cliff, is a rarity. In the Middle Ages, at Beynac and in the vast majority of castles, when it came to building a fortified structure, one of the main criteria was the thickness of the walls. The thicker they were, the harder it was for projectiles from war machines to penetrate them. At Château de Beynac, some walls are 3 meters thick.
They are huge because they are filled. On the outside, we have those beautiful ashlars, and then they used a mixture of stone blocks and mortar to fill it.
It's like stuffing. They put stones in there, anything they could find, chunks of rock embedded in a kind of concrete without lime, earth concrete, clay concrete.
The wall had to be stable, not beautiful. It's filled in, but it's still effective construction. It's masonry.
They're called sandwich walls.
The ramparts, the keep, the terraces, the inner courtyard. This castle is exceptional. It meets all the criteria of a real fortified castle. But what we see today is not quite how it would have been in the Middle Ages. Some parts were added much later, in the 16th century.
All the terraces that we have here, these terraces that were used for gardens and orchards, didn't exist. The topography was much more uneven.
Some of the towers and staircases were built well after the Middle Ages.
The question is, what was the first castle like? We don't know.
However, a number of documents have been found that help us decipher the mysteries surrounding the construction of Beynac Castle. Like this exceptional room where justice was administered. This room underwent a radical and impressive transformation. It stands in stark contrast to all the other rooms in the chateau, which have a completely different layout.
The living quarters are very small and poorly lit, not well heated. People lived in degrees of discomfort we can't imagine today.
This room is completely different. With its huge high ceilings and more windows, wider and larger than anywhere else. The wealthy owners of Beynac created the Salle des États du Périgord, a sacred place where the 4 great families of the region would meet to dispense justice in the name of the King of France, Charles VII. For the room to reflect the decisions taken here, major changes had to be made, starting with a very traditional, much lower ceiling. With the roof removed, the aim was to create a huge, vaulted ceiling. To achieve this, the castle's builders had to reinforce one of the walls, as it was too thin to support the planned structure. The weight of the new vault would have crushed the original wall, so its thickness had to be increased considerably. Once the wall was reinforced, the new ceiling was installed using wooden scaffolding, on top of which the builders could place layers of stone as they went along. The 6-meter-high ceiling also allows for new windows. The sun's rays flood the room,
to let in the divine light, which enables them to work for justice.
The metamorphosis is complete. When the 4 families met here, they each laid claim to the title of First Baron of the Périgord. The Château de Beynac was to experience several episodes of far greater tension over the course of its existence. War with the English over territory was raging in the region. The famous 100 Years' War from 1337 to 1453. But Beynac Castle boasted one of the best defensive systems of its time, starting with its main entrance, a barbican.
Barbican comes from the Arabic and means trap. It was meant to trap enemies.
The barbican was an ancient form of airlock, an entrance outside the main gate, and a bottleneck for controlling those entering and leaving the castle. Potential attackers usually disguised themselves to try and get into the main courtyard.
They pretend to be travelers or common people to take the castle by trickery.
Disguising yourself in order to gain access is a much cheaper way to invade a castle than besieging it for weeks on end. And it avoids destroying an asset worth a lot of money. Guards patrol the barbican.
They checked loads visually to see what was coming in and who was involved.
In an emergency, the drawbridge could be raised. Archers were posted high up on a low double wall. They fired their arrows at the invaders, who would meet their end in the barbican. A bloodbath that attackers preferred to avoid. So they needed to come up with other ways to bring down the fortress.
You can also make an impression in another way. How? With war machines.
Siege engines, various kinds of trebuchet or catapult. Machines capable of demolishing walls several meters thick. Feared throughout France, they are so complex to operate, only experts can use them.
These machines are rare in the 12th and 13th centuries because there aren't many who can think so precisely, who have the ability to anticipate all the problems, people that we would today call engineers.
Gradually, the word engineer came to be used for the ingenious people capable of making ingenious machines.
In the 11th century, during the Crusades, Western knights discovered strange machines that fired projectiles. Not with human power, but using counterweights. The difference is impressive.
This is revolutionary. It's revolutionary because these wooden crates are filled with stones. They can be topped up with earth or sand, but they weigh several tons. And when a crate drops, it propels stones weighing 200 or 300 kilos.
A single projectile wouldn't be enough to open up a breach, which is what you need to enter the castle. But the ability to systematically hit the same spot is going to weaken the walls.
To create a breach, the balls must all be fired with the same force, the same intensity, and in a very precise direction. That's why the machine's settings are essential. The principle is simple. A crate weighing several tons is released and falls to the ground. It activates a beam which hurls the projectile into the distance.
To fill the crate properly, you need to know how much to put in it. That depends on the weight of the ball and the distance.
A pin keeps the beam on the ground. The leather slingshot is then loaded with the ball to be fired. A missile designed with great skill.
When you pull out the pin, there's nothing left holding the boom down, so the 1, 3 or 10-ton body, which is 5.6 meters high, will pivot.
And the ball and chain suddenly pick up speed and fly through the air. The heavier it is, the greater the speed, the more impressive the damage. For a 10-kilo boulder, you need a ton of stone in the crate, creating a propulsion ideal for a 200-meter target.
They would adjust the machine with a few test firings, and once the distance and the impact had been determined, they would keep this setting and continue firing the machines.
It was very precise, brilliant.
With a well-set-up machine, 5 balls could be enough to break through a 2-meter thick wall, generating fear in the population, a powerful incentive to negotiate a surrender. But the catapult could also be used to suppress the primary needs of those living in the castle.
They would try and hit the well by firing projectiles, but maybe also the corpses of sick animals to poison the water in it. An ancient ancestor of today's chemical weapons.
Most of the time, the lords ended up surrendering. These war machines were the undoing of a large number of fortified castles. One risky form of attack was to climb over the curtain walls and enter the castle with just a few men. Once inside, the aim was to open the main gate, but they would have to get a ladder up against the wall first. However, the chances of surviving were very slim. The guards wouldn't hesitate to throw stones, which would have been small but effective.
A small stone weighing 2 kilos that falls 20 meters on your head, that will knock you out. And when you know that the attackers are wounded, you can pour all sorts of disgusting things over them, like the contents of the latrine. It's humiliation, it's the smell, but it also infects the wounds. And we're talking about an extended siege, so if a soldier is wounded and infected, we know he won't last long.
Beynac Castle is equipped with machicolations to prevent attacks via ladders. Structures directly linked to attacks from the wall.
There are small, regular gaps which allowed the defenders to drop stones, but they could also shoot arrows or throw things at the attackers.
However, they didn't pour boiling water onto soldiers' heads. Water was a rare commodity in the castle. They couldn't just turn on a tap, just as boiling oil was never used as a defense.
In the texts, we never read that boiling oil was used in profusion. Oil takes time to heat up. You need nuts. You have to crack them to extract the oil. It's a skill, a craft that they'd prefer to monetize. It's expensive, and if they bought it, they consumed it.
The Beynac fortress has seen very few assaults in its almost 1,000 years of existence. But some successful sieges remain famous, such as that of Simon de Montfort in 1214. The knight was known as a butcher on the battlefield, leaving no survivors. In the 13th century, this renowned warrior fought the Cathars and ended up in Périgord. There, he decided to take Beynac Castle.
Simon de Montfort started a siege. He was a violent, bloodthirsty man. He went on to enter the castle and in anger razed the Sarrazin tower. He destroyed the keep and then, as a sign of humiliation, the outer ramparts.
One tower dating back to the 7th century, well before the arrival of the barony of Beynac, has completely disappeared. Structures surrounding the castle were destroyed. The appearance of the Beynac fortress was transformed after the visit of Simon de Montfort. But in 1218, the man of the Crusades died, his head split open by a catapult ball thrown from a rampart. The Beynacs regained possession of the chateau and rebuilt it. Did Simon de Montfort destroy more than was recorded? Is this square tower actually much more recent than we imagine?
The keep, the square seigneurial tower that you see next to it, is the oldest structure on the site, although its date has not been completely determined. It's not clear whether this is a 12th century tower or whether it was rebuilt after the siege of 1214 at the beginning of the 13th century. We can't completely rule out the idea that the original castle, well, that there's nothing left.
This is the great mystery of the Château de Beynac. Does it date back 900 years? Or is it much more recent? This fortress is as much a mystery as it is an open book on the history of France. A medieval period with a culmination, the golden age of fortified castles. Today, Beynac is a well-preserved treasure of southwestern France. Just like another French gem, one of the most beautiful and best preserved castles in Brittany, the Château de Fougères.
The chateau is a magnificent example of medieval military architecture.
The size of 2 football pitches, the fortified castle of Fougères has witnessed 1,000 years of wars, innovation, and engineering. The medieval megastructure is truly monumental. It's hard to imagine the scale of the work that had to be carried out. Some of its walls are 7 meters thick, gigantic, but essential if it was to withstand the ever more powerful weapons of war.
We're standing at the foot of the Mélusine Tower, which is almost 30 meters high, perched on a rock about 20 meters high. Pretty impressive.
The fortified castle of Fougères is a titan of stone. But you have to learn to decipher it. It's the distillation of several eras. The first castle was built at the beginning of the year 1000. Archaeologists have found traces of a castle that no longer exists.
The present castle corresponds more or less to how it must have been at the beginning of the 11th century.
This first wooden castle was gigantic. It took a huge number of trees to erect such a large fortress.
In those days, you could use any kind of wood. So there were whole forests available that could provide the resources needed to build the castle.
The topography, which is perfectly suited to the construction of a defensive structure, is surrounded by impressive palisades.
We're high up on a rock called Le Rocher de la Couarde. The castle is built on this rock, surrounded by marshes.
Traces found on the rock suggest that there was a keep, built of earth, a little stone, and wood. Our data on the period is minimal. But there are written records of a family that owned it, the Fougères, a line that became very powerful. In the 12th century, Raoul II de Fougères even became an officer of the King of England.
This Plantagenet king, whose possessions stretched from Scotland to the Spanish border, had the right of oversight over part of France. So it really was a vast domain.
The Fougères family were becoming increasingly important. Their magnificent wooden castle was no longer enough. They needed to move up the order in terms of housing and defending the region.
And so, as the lord became richer, wood was gradually replaced by stone, and they quickly moved on, even if the wooden frameworks remained, to a stone phase.
The builders used schist, which is not very good quality. It's quite crumbly and cannot be cut or sculpted properly. However, it was used for most of the masonry work and was thus needed in large quantities. And the schist had the advantage of being available just a few hundred meters away. When it came to door and window frames, there was no choice. They had to travel 20 kilometers to find granite, which is quite a lot more expensive. The granite was used to mark the entrance to the chateau. It showed the owner's wealth with a material that is rare in the region.
The base is square with sides 7 meters long, so it's really quite an imposing structure. And it's made of granite, which wasn't available locally and was thus a mark of prestige.
Anyone wishing to enter the castle had to show their credentials. They then had to pass through a large barbican, which was now no longer a corridor, but a real courtyard, serving as a kind of airlock. Guards were stationed everywhere to check the intentions of those entering. Some on high guard in the second entrance tower, which was destroyed, but according to historians, was very impressive.
Imagine a tower even higher than the Tour de Saint-Hilaire, the first entrance to the castle, so it was an important tower.
The builders didn't just put slits for archers in these towers. Guards could shoot their arrows safely, but they needed more space. Wooden structures completed the architecture of the fortress.
At the top of the towers and the ramparts, wooden galleries allowed archers to go all the way around.
These wooden galleries have all disappeared. but they would have been no more than 2 meters wide. From these wooden scaffolds, the guards would give orders and sometimes launch the ultimate counterattack to defend the castle, flooding the courtyard. One of Fougères' defensive secrets. The castle is surrounded by a natural moat, filled by the Nançon, a nearby river. These moats were particularly effective in preventing attacks from the ramparts.
Attackers had to cross this wet zone, weighed down with all the paraphernalia they would have had.
The Nançon was also diverted to turn the wheels of a mill. This was a major source of income for the Fougères family, who levied a tax on anyone wishing to grind their grain here. But this water also provided excellent protection in the event of an attack. As soon as enemies arrived, the guards would sound the alarm by blowing a horn. The gates were closed to buy time. A battering ram could break down a door in just a few minutes, but those precious moments could decide over life and death. Later on, water would play a crucial role in the counterattack.
There was also a system which fed the water back into the moat. There was a wooden dormant bridge which could be destroyed or removed in the event of an attack. The defenders blocked the water outlet so that the water rose, allowing them to drown the attackers.
The enemies came under fire from the guards with their arrows. From the towers, the walls, all the way round. Without protection, they fell one by one. If they didn't drown, weighed down by their armor. This is why the Château de Fougères was rarely attacked. During its 900 years of existence, only 4 major assaults are noted in the records. However, they don't explain the virtual disappearance of the main towers at the second entrance. Just like the living areas, of which very little remains.
In the 19th century, the castle was used as a source of construction material for many monuments. To build houses in the area, it was easier to dismantle the walls here than to go and find building materials in the quarries.
As new weapons were arriving in Europe, destroying the fortified castles, the Château de Fougères needed to be protected. With the advent of gunpowder, the catapults and other war engines lost their reputation. They made fortunes for some by pulverizing the ramparts of fortified castles, but could not themselves survive the advent of cannons. These monumental pieces, weighing several tons, were developed during the 15th century to replace the catapults. The Château de Fougères thus had to transform itself to deal with the new threat.
You place the battery in front of a wall and keep firing until it collapses. Cannons changed the game completely, and so castles were forced to adapt by integrating them in the defenses. We see that the openings were adapted and enlarged so that cannoneers could shoot at enemy batteries. At the same time, they had to reduce the height, but increase the thickness of the walls. In fact, this is the beginning of modern fortification.
And at the Château de Fougères, the builders applied this new architecture to the letter. Two artillery towers were built in response to the new attacks, and they were exceptional. This one has walls 7 meters thick, 7 meters of granite and compacted schist to withstand the power of iron cannonballs. 7 meters in which to house cannons that could be aimed at the enemy. The battles became ever more intense. The English had taken possession of Fougères Castle, and in 1449, the French wanted the fortress back and laid siege to the chateau. The French army had meanwhile gained an impressive command of cannons.
At the end of the 100 Years' War, France had the most powerful artillery in Europe. One of the factors that would tip the 100 Years' War in favor of the French.
It soon became apparent that the cannons were doing much more damage than expected. The castle walls were no longer thick enough. So how could Fougères Castle further strengthen its defences? If adding stone was no longer any use, the solution was simple: earth.
There are large embankments all over the castle, which cushion the back of the walls and reinforce them.
These embankments are found in large numbers on the ramparts of the castle. Their shock-absorbing qualities are decisive during attacks. They're still there, centuries after they were built, which is more than you can say about other structures, including one that surprises everyone. Why does this door open onto 10 meters of empty space?
What does it open onto? Tourists often think it's the old entrance to the chateau, but it isn't.
Why, according to the documents, did only guards pass through this door? Where did they go? And why is there nothing beyond it? Historians discovered the answer on an 18th century plan of the castle. And it's incredible.
In fact, this gate gave access via a drawbridge to a small fort on the other side, on the rock.
A purely defensive bastion with a whole arsenal inside, linked to the castle by a footbridge, and like the great fortress, also built on a rock.
The rock was destroyed for the construction of a major road, which was built to link Fougères and Rennes in 1780 to 1782.
A fortified castle in two separate parts is a unique feature of Fougères and a real rarity. Although the structure is no longer complete, the castle is still in exceptional condition for its size, almost 2 hectares, and its age. There are many campaigns to preserve the site. Without them, there would be no fortress, with water seeping in everywhere and damaging the stonework. Everything is worked as it was in the past, to preserve the craftsman's authenticity, like the mortar, for example.
You have to find sand of the same composition, colour, type and grain size, and that goes for the lime as well, so that you can reproduce as closely as possible what was used at the time.
Nearly 1,000 years of history await tourists from all over the world. On their way to Mont Saint-Michel, just a few kilometers away, they stop off at Fougères and discover that this fortified castle was even used as a prison in the 18th century. A destiny shared by another such edifice, and this one is world famous: the Château d'If in Marseille.
What's really impressive about the Château d'If is the rocky, jagged island with its sheer cliffs.
It's scary. And its colossal appearance has a lot to do with it. Its walls form a square measuring 28 meters on each side, a building that is unique in the world, impressive in its architecture, and merciless to those wishing to enter the city with evil intent.
This is really the gateway to Marseille.
To live here, the builders had to adapt to the fact that the fortress was built on an island, with all the difficulties that entailed.
Apart from visits by local fishermen, no one ever had the idea of settling on the Île d'If.
These rocks only appear on navigation charts. They're used to hold those wishing to disembark in Marseille in quarantine. Those who come from the open sea are forced to wait for 40 days to ensure that no infectious diseases are detected. In 1516, the King of France was celebrating the French victory at Marignan and landed in Marseille, where he was received with pomp and ceremony. And it was here that a curiosity caught his eye.
He wanted to go and see a wild animal in quarantine that was on a stopover in Frioul.
He went all the way to the Île d'If to see this curious beast.
The animal was a rhinoceros, a mammal many people had never even heard of. The beast was a gift from the King of Portugal to Pope Leo X and was quartered on the Île d'If before continuing its journey.
The Pope was given an elephant, which he really liked, so they sent him an Asian rhinoceros too.
When François I arrived to see this famous beast, he must have been astonished by the pachyderm. But above all, he appreciated the view from the rock.
A 360-degree panorama of the city, the cliffs off the coast, and the barrier formed by the Frioul archipelago. Coming from the open sea, it's not possible to pass north of the Frioul archipelago because the cliffs cut off the wind. Galleys struggle to make headway. And to the south, the rocks are just under the surface, and there's a veritable graveyard of ships with smashed hulls. This 3-hectare chunk of rock opposite Marseille represented a fantastic opportunity for François I.
He realized that the island had a strategic position that would allow him to monitor movements to and from the Kingdom of France.
It was a difficult project to implement. The stones would have to be brought in by boat, which would be very expensive. And the people of Marseille have always been independent-minded. They wouldn't allow it. They were even opposed to the idea of a naval checkpoint.
François I explained it was to protect Marseille from possible invasion by sea, but the people of Marseille weren't fooled. They also saw it as a way of keeping an eye on them.
That's why work didn't start until 1529. First of all, the rock had to be dug up to work on a stable base. The stone extracted was ideal for building. It was used to make sandwich walls.
They put up the outside facings and filled the inside with stones and mortar.
That's how work began on the first wall, 28 meters long and sometimes 4 or 5 meters thick, built up in layers of 60 centimeters.
Then they let it dry and moved on to the next level. So the castle is about 20 meters high, made up of about 35 levels.
Then a second wall was built, a third, and a final one, all the same length. But the work wasn't progressing fast enough, despite François I's demand for a much earlier deadline. As well as protecting Marseille and supervising traffic, his intention was to levy a tax on every ship passing through. Wars were expensive, and the kingdom needed money, so the king put his foot down. Everything was in place to speed things up, and once the square base was complete, construction of the towers could begin. The Saint Christophe Tower, the tallest, is to the northwest, 42 meters high. It provides a view of the sea. Two other towers are linked by a terrace. The Château d'If was a formidable armed rampart. Most of the time, there was no need to fire a single cannonball. The fortress was far too imposing to venture too close. Which was fortunate for the Kingdom of France, because when it was finished, the officers realized that this magnificent fortress was in fact useless.
The castle has a problem. It's high above the sea. It stands on a platform at a height of around 20 meters and rises to a height of 20 meters, so it overlooks the sea at a height of over 40 meters. At this height, you have a very wide dispersion of shots, so if the ships are big, they can be hit, but small galleys sail well below the rock. All they have to do is pass close to the foot of the chateau, and they're completely out of reach from the fort. The only effective coastal artillery is one close to the surface, which can fire into the hulls of the ships.
But if the ships managed to get away from the island by taking advantage of the strong currents, they had nothing to worry about.
The range of 16th century artillery pieces is 200 meters, so it doesn't play an important role.
All these difficulties destroying enemy ships seriously undermined the very notion of a defensive fortress. But If didn't become a total fiasco. The fortress was impressive. It was far too frightening for outsiders to try anything. The castle was never stormed after it was finished. Its reputation was based solely on intimidation. And it worked. In 1540, because of the lack of threat from the sea, the castle put its cannons away, thus allowing the island and its fortress to be transformed into a prison. And not just any old prison.
You're on an island, difficult to get to, difficult to escape from. You're far from the coast. It's like a French-style Alcatraz.
There were 3 floors. The most luxurious, with light and fireplaces, was upstairs, while the ground floor was hell. No privacy, dark, at times with more than 200 prisoners crammed in together. In the constant humidity, full of vermin and rubbish, life expectancy was no more than a few months, which suited the state just fine.
Prisoners were very expensive, and even more so at the Château d'If, because food had to be transported, and above all, the companies that supervised the groups had to be paid.
Hygiene was reduced to a minimum. The problem was the water supply. But the builders of the castle had planned a supply for the soldiers manning the fort. In the plans, we find a monumental hidden structure. The chateau has a cistern at its heart. Under the central courtyard, a tank a dozen meters deep collects rainwater. Up to 400 tons of it. And everything was designed to allow it to fill up.
The fort doesn't have roofs, just terraces that allow the cannons to be deployed on platforms. So there are gutters everywhere that allow the water to flow back to the center, to the cistern.
But when there are more than 500 people in the If prison, not even a vat this size can provide exemplary hygiene. The prisoners drink and wash from the same source.
The water they spat out, for example, after cleaning their teeth, or the water from the toilet, flowed back into the tank so it could be reused. So in terms of hygiene, it wasn't ideal.
Surviving for more than a few weeks is a life and death challenge. The names engraved by prisoners in the stone bear witness as evidence of their time at Ypres.
There are terrifying descriptions of the hygienic conditions in which they were locked up. And these people had a very low life expectancy. We estimate that they survived for a few months, 9 months at the most.
A famous writer wrote about the disastrous conditions. Alexandre Dumas imagined the 14-year stay of his hero, Edmond Dantès. The book, The Count of Monte Cristo, was a worldwide success. Even today, it's the reason why tourists come here from all over the world.
But apart from Dumas' legendary hero, the Count of Monte Cristo, no prisoner ever escaped from the Château d'If.
An impregnable fortress, a deadly prison. The reputation of the Château d'If has changed over the centuries. Today, it's one of France's favorite monuments. Every year, more than 100,000 visitors discover its colossal towers, its eternal ramparts, and its unique view of the port of Marseille. The Château d'If is also the last fortified castle in France. The 100 Years' War and the wars of religion before and after called for the construction of fortresses. But this period finished with the end of the Middle Ages and France's embracing of the Renaissance in the mid-15th century.
There were far fewer internal or territorial conflicts than in the Middle Ages.
What remains are the vestiges of a bloody period, when it was necessary for rulers to protect themselves from invasion. The Château d'If, the Château de Beynac, and the Château de Fougères. Emblems of an incredible period in the history of France, a period when thousands of chateaux were built, when weapons became increasingly sophisticated, and their designers took on a new profession with the birth of engineering. These megastructures are a fantastic testimony to human genius.